Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. And Putin steps in and saves the Christians. I told y'all he would do this. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, we knew the head choppers wouldn't be allowed to kill the Christians and force them to change their fates. Putin would step in. He stepped in just as we said he would. But good dinner, man. Yeah, brothers.
Let me remind you that at the end of February this year, numerous reputable news agencies, citing their sources in Damascus, reported that despite the rise to power of pro-Turkish militants in Syria, Russia managed to maintain all its air force and naval bases in this Middle Eastern country. This information was also confirmed by the news agency Bloomberg. American journalists report that the current authorities in Damascus do not want Moscow to fully withdraw its troops from Syria. It is reported that this desire of the Syrian authorities is attributed to several factors. In particular, the new Syrian authorities expect that the Russians will continue to provide military assistance to the Syrian army in the fight against the armed groups of ISIS, which are still in the eastern part of the country. Moreover, the current authorities in Damascus are well aware that the presence of Russian troops in Syria balances Turkey's growing influence in the region. Against this backdrop, it is also worth noting Moscow's diplomatic victory in Sudan. In particular, it became known that Moscow was able to make a deal with Sudan on the establishment of a Russian naval base in that country. The Minister of Defense of the Republic of Sudan, Yassin Ibrahim, also confirmed this information. He stated that Sudan permitted Russia to build a large naval base in the port of Sudan, only on the condition that Moscow would enhance the Sudanese army and regularly train Sudanese soldiers and officers. Undoubtedly, the appearance of a Russian naval base in Sudan will significantly strengthen Moscow's position in the Middle East and Africa.
I'm glad they brought that up, that naval base in Sudan, because we're going to play a video of the head choppers fleeing from Sudan because Russia allowed them to take back their capital. It's all over the news. The Americans don't want to talk about it, but people are rising up in revolution around the goddamn world, sick of the head choppers in the U.S. and the imperialists.
Russia's diplomatic successes in Syria and Sudan have infuriated European globalists. In particular, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock officially stated that the European Union must do everything to ensure that Russia loses its military bases in Syria.
Now, what you gonna do?
Moreover, she even threatened the Damascus authorities with new sanctions if Syria continues to cooperate with Russia. Similar statements were made in Brussels, London, and Paris. In general, the European Union and Britain demanded that the Syrian authorities completely break off relations with Russia. It is noteworthy that immediately after these statements by the European globalists, the situation in Syria deteriorated sharply. So, in early March of this year, pro-Turkish militants began conducting raids in central and western Syria to detain all former supporters of Bashar al-Assad. During the first 3 days, pro-Turkish militants detained and killed about 100 people. All this led to the fact that supporters and associates of Bashar al-Assad created a military council for the liberation of Syria, and announced the beginning of an armed struggle against the current regime, led by Ahmed al-Sharia. Brigadier General Gayeth Suleiman Dalla, who previously commanded the 42nd Brigade of the 4th Division of the Syrian Army during Assad's reign, headed this military council. Notably, the current Syrian authorities took all the events seriously and aggressively. By order of Ahmed al-Sharia, a curfew was imposed in all rebel provinces of Syria, after which pro-Turkish militants carried out a real massacre of the local population. At the same time, these militants did not hide their crimes. There are hundreds of videos online where it is clearly visible how mass shootings took place on the streets and in people's homes. Between March 1 and March 10, 2025, pro-Turkish militants killed about 5,000 people. They were mostly Syrian Alawites. Many countries condemned the actions of the Syrian authorities, and called everything that was happening a real genocide of the Syrian Alawites. Fleeing from the militants, the population of Latakia and other Syrian provinces gathered near Russian military bases. People literally begged the Russian military to save them from certain death. Reports indicate that the Russians sheltered almost 10,000 people at their military bases and in the surrounding area. Simultaneously with this, Russia and the United States requested emergency UN Security Council consultations on Syria. It is noteworthy that Moscow and Washington called the actions of the Syrian authorities terrorist and called for an end to the massacre of Syrian Alawites. However, the European Union disagreed with Moscow and Washington. In particular, Brussels has officially stated that it is the Syrian Alawites who are to blame for the fact that Damascus began to use military force against them. According to the European Union, the Syrian Alawites are supporters of Bashar al-Assad, and therefore, the harsh actions of the new Syrian authorities can be understood. Thus, the so-called European leaders fully supported the terrorist actions of the new Syrian authorities. Against this backdrop, Russia had to make a tough and rather dangerous decision in order to save the lives of Syrian Alawites. So, on March 24, the Russian command ordered the expansion of the controlled zone around the Russian military bases. Within 24 hours, the Russian troops captured such settlements as Kirbat Ashari, Akdarmo, and Al-Kubaisi. Reports indicate that the pro-Turkish militants, seeing the approach of Russian troops, decided to retreat. The flight of the militants was so rapid that many of them even abandoned heavy equipment, including tanks. The capture of these settlements by the Russian troops allowed Moscow to create a so-called buffer zone around Russian military bases and ensure the safety of thousands of Syrian Alawites. At the same time, everything that is happening indicates that the Russian troops are preparing for further expansion of the controlled zone around the Russian military bases. It is reported that military transport planes continue to deliver heavy equipment and weapons to Russian military bases. Against this backdrop, insiders in the Kremlin said that over the past 28 hours, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had spoken by phone with Vladimir Putin twice. Insiders claim that the Israeli and Turkish leaders literally begged Putin to order the Russian troops to stop the further advance in Syria. It is noteworthy that the current head of Syria, Ahmad al-Sharia, has not yet commented on Moscow's attempts to save the lives of Syrian Alawites and the seizure of 3 Syrian settlements by the Russian troops. Let me remind you that earlier, Ahmed al-Sharia stated that he does not want a fissure in the relationship between Russia and Syria. According to him, building deep and strategic relations with Moscow is one of the priority goals of Damascus.
It was a bitter day for Abu Dhabi, where the UAE-backed Rapid Support Forces, RSF,
Now,
in
United Arab Emirates, these rapid support forces, these are the head choppers, some of the same bastards they sent to Libya to overthrow Gaddafi and then enslave black people. They've been enslaving a lot of black people in Sudan too. Oh yes, these are the old Arab slave traders who are fleeing for their lives right now.
in Sudan began fleeing en masse,
With the help of
following their defeat from the siege by the Sudanese armed forces. Images of the mass escape of the militias circulated widely on the internet on March 26, 2025, showing remnants of the militias crossing the Jebel Aliyah Dam on the White Nile south of downtown Khartoum, as the Sudanese government army reported its success in retaking almost the entire capital, including recapturing Khartoum International Airport from the Western-backed militias through their UAE agents. Incredible drone footage showed thousands of militias and their families running west of the river to save themselves, before Sudanese army columns advanced to close it in. A Sudanese military spokesman reported that General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan made his first film appearance in Khartoum on his way to the presidential palace, following the recapture of the capital, which is now fully under army control. South of Khartoum city center, troops are also besieging the strategic Jebel Aliyah area, the last major stronghold of the militias, now under government control. In addition, government forces announced they had also retaken all bridges over the Nile River, connecting the three cities that make up Greater Khartoum after months of fierce fighting. This is a major blow to the West, and the militias are in disarray, desperately trying to leave the last bridge they have, leaving the capital.
So we'll start off with a lot of humiliation for the NATO in the West, in Syria and in Sudan. Also in Yemen. Let's not forget the humiliation.
Welcome, everyone. It's your host, Danny Haifong, and I am happy to be joined today by the one and only independent journalist and geopolitical analyst, Pepe Escobar, joining us from Sana'a, capital of Yemen. Pepe, great to be with you today.
And here is Sana'a, everybody.
I'm gonna carry literally.
I'm gonna carry this mini Sana'a gypsum. It's very beautiful with me. It was an official gift, actually. I'm gonna carry this with me everywhere, in fact. And amazing. It's a copy of the famous stone house, which was built in the late 1700s. Based on the original building, which was 3,000 years ago. And amazing. It was the residence of a famous Imam Yahya, for 40 years. And this is, in terms of architecture and in terms of a house built of stone, is unique on the whole planet. It's absolutely amazing. Outstanding.
Everybody, as we get started, do hit the like button. You can find all of Pepe Escobar's work on his Telegram and his X or Twitter account. You can find all that in the video description. Do hit the like button as we get started, though, and let us get started. Pepe, you are there in Yemen. As of our speaking, there was just two announcements made. One, Donald Trump said the Houthis, aka the actual name Ansarallah, the Yemeni military, maybe we could call it more specifically, has been defeated, that they're ready to surrender. However, there was just ballistic missiles sent into Israel, which completely crippled Ben Gurion Airport, left it without any flights outgoing. Now, Pepe, you are there in Yemen. Tell us what you have learned about the people of Yemen, this ongoing campaign in solidarity with Gaza, as well as what you can tell us about what we need to know about Yemen, Ansarallah, and this U.S. war that the Donald Trump administration is launching on the country. I'm just gonna hand it
How
straight
many
to you.
hours do I have?
You have as long as you need, Pepe. As long as you
Can
need.
we go all the way to tomorrow?
Exactly. Yes.
Well, I cannot even begin to express to you and to our audience the shock of being here. Look, I'm an old dinosaur, as you all know. I've been playing this game for a long time. This year is my 40th year as a foreign correspondent, everywhere that matters. And it's like, if you look at it from a Chinese point of view, everything was leading to this moment. You know, coming to the, I would say this is the most important of the lands of Islam. And it's something that I had discussed extensively with my great friend, Princess Victoria from Sicily, which not only she's one of the last great true aristocrats in Europe, but she's an Islamologist. She has a PhD in Islamic studies in Rome, and she lived when she was young all across the Arab world, and she lived here in the desert as well. And she was always talking to me about Yemen. And we exchanged messages a few minutes ago. She's very happy that I am here, and I'm finally witnessing what she experienced as a young woman living here. It's undescribable. The thing that strikes you the most is their generosity, their purity of character, their moral clarity, the fact that they seem, they are not overwhelmed by what's happening. First of all, because this is very, very important in terms of dates. This Wednesday, March 26th, is the 10th year of a war against Yemen, which was initiated 10 years ago by the Saudis, the Emiratis, and one of those coalitions of the willing of Arab states. All of them except Oman, which is something that they recognize here. Oman never betrayed us. Everybody else did, right? And obviously, who was leading from behind? Who was supplying the weapons? You know very well, right? So the new war, in fact, de facto launched by Trump 2.0, which they will lose. There's absolutely no question about that. It's nothing new for Yemenis. Well, coming here is already an enormous shock, because this is, maybe some of you know that the small group of foreigners who's here now, we are between 10 and 12, more or less, including Professor Ma from China, a great researcher from Malaysia, a very famous guy from Egypt. He's a poet and a comedian as well, and a few Westerners, including myself. And they told us from the beginning, we broke the blockade on Yemen, physically, in terms of people, you know. And for instance, there have been no foreigners coming here, or especially a small group of foreigners, for years. We are the first ones. So in terms of our responsibility of witnessing and explaining to the world what we are seeing and what we are experiencing and what we are learning from them, especially, I'm all ears. I never learned so much in 1 week in my life, probably. It's non-stop. You go to bed and you are, and of course, and we have the extra gift of meeting the people at the highest level. And that will bring me to a story that I want to tell you soon, why we were in Sada in the first place and who we were supposed to meet. But we knew from the beginning it would be impossible for ultra heavy security reasons. The leader of Ansarallah, Abdul Malik al-Houthi. My instincts were already told me on the road, or by the way, the road from here to it's something outstanding. I published a few pictures, maybe, which don't do justice to the road. It's like a comparison will be fitting with some parts of the American Southwest, as beautiful as the American Southwest, but more desolate, you know, more arid, more rugged, very raw, with a few villages scattered here and there and all that. It's absolutely breathtaking. And I was thinking on the way, I said, no, of course not. But the fact that they made this very complicated security arrangement to take us from here, Sana, to go to Sada, which is 230 kilometers. They said, okay, we're going to leave at 3 in the morning. Well, Yemeni time, it turned out to be 5:30. But we were a convoy of white Toyotas. So, and they disguised the convoy. The convoy never looked like a convoy, you know. So we were not running as a convoy. So that was very, very clever. For instance, our convoy here, our motorcade here in Sana, it's a motorcade of black SUVs. You see it right away. So for the trip, they improvised a completely different scheme. And of course, an enormous risk. Obviously, the Americans are cowards. CENTCOM are cowards. They never bomb during the day, as all of you know. They only bomb at night. And they only bomb civilian installations. This bullshit that they bombed military targets in Yemen, they don't even know where the targets are. And this is something that I heard from somebody of the Yemeni armed forces, you know. And these people don't lie, by the way. They are extremely correct. So the fact that they took all this trouble to take us there was very, very important for several reasons. Not only the fact that, of course, we were dreaming of having an audience with Abdul Malik al-Houthi, even if we knew that it would be impossible, considering that Sada, northwest Yemen, is being bombed, I would say, practically every day, right? But they wanted to show us deep Yemen. And one of the diplomats told me, you know, somewhat cryptic way, look, the seat of power is not here. It's over there. Why? Because that's where al-Houthi lives. He never leaves Sada governorate and a small area where he lives in Sada. So it was important for us to go there and get the picture. Don't forget that Ansar Allah was founded by al-Houthi's older brother, Hussein. And for instance, tonight, after coming back from Sana, I had the privilege and the honor to have a special conversation. He talked to me, and then he talked to Mandela separately. Only both of us separately, because he wants. He asked me a lot of stuff about the West. He asked me about BRICS. So they are very, very well informed, you know. And this person I was talking to, I prefer not to reveal his name. He studied with the founder of Ansara at the same university in Sudan. You see the Islamic interconnection. Absolutely fascinating, right? So it was, I assume they spent a few days trying to put together this operation to take us to Sana. But of course, there is the Yemeni jazz improvisation element. So we get there and there's nothing. There's no internet. We don't have anything. We have just our clothes. We don't know how long we're going to stay. And then we discovered that we're going to spend the night over there. And obviously, some of us, we have commitments. No? In my case, I had to cancel 2 podcasts for obvious reasons. You know, if it was today, Daniel, I'll be canceling cast. And you know how I was saved to send a message. We went to the bazaar and we found a very nice guy who had a 3G modem with a password, and we used his 3G modem with a password. But it's absolutely outstanding, and they love to help. First of all, because they haven't seen foreigners since forever, right? And then obviously, of course, we had, apart from fabulous meetings, we went to the site. This is very important, and you're gonna see on my Telegram channel and other ones. You know, people who I think Mike Wallace and Claire Daly, the dynamic duo former at the European Parliament, I think they posted this as well. We visited the site that was bombed by CENTCOM on Monday, this past Monday, and guess what? It was an construction cancer hospital, which
I think I might have the imagery of that. Hold on, I can pull it up. I have the video, but I'll just show the image.
Pull the image.
Is this it right here?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is you standing. So
Yes.
continue.
This is the hospital in the back. Right. It was still being built, and they assumed that it will be finished by the end of this year, beginning of next year. They said it was very hard to get the funds. There were donations from all over, because this would be the only cancer hospital in the whole of North and Northwest Yemen. So now they have to start from scratch all over again, or patients have to come here to Sana'a. And this is a very poor area, so everybody was counting.
Criminals.
So the perversity of this bombing is particularly heartbreaking and absolutely disgusting at the same time, you know. So the fact that we saw this, and we saw other places that were bombed during the coalition war that started in 2015, including they took us to another place which became a memorial. The Saudis sent a missile against a school bus. They killed all the kids. And they said, no, it was a military target. It was not. You know how it was discovered? The cell phone of one of the kids that was found under rubble. Destroyed completely the Saudi version. We saw the bombings of the Sada University. In fact, they bombed everything around the Sada University, including the residence of the students. So all that for us is extremely enlightening, because it puts in perspective the past 10 years, in fact, and the fact that nothing can break these people, absolutely nothing. And then I would say the icing on the cake was I extracted from the intelligence, look, I need to go to the bazaar, to the souk, but by myself. I want to walk into the souk. They said, okay, but we're going to have to send somebody with you. So they put me on a van with armed guards and all that. We arrive at the souk and say, guys, let me please at least walk around. So they were very cool. I walked around. I entered the shops. I talked to some of the merchants, and it was amazing. I'm starting to post some of these photos. It's a small photographic portrait of real people in Northwest Yemen. It's something that you don't see anywhere. It's not documented anywhere. It is in the Arab world, but not in the West or in other parts of the world as well. So this was a particularly fantastic, and they received me like they were curious, and at the same time they were grateful to see a Westerner over there, you know, mingling with them. You know, it's something you cannot even express the feeling of happiness of, you know, the people-to-people exchange that you can have like this. It's fantastic. It's much more important, in fact, than meeting officials, diplomats, intel people, which of course we met, and it was amazing because everybody came to talk to us, Danny. Can you imagine Yahya Saree coming to our hotel in the middle of a bloody bombing, and probably the number 2 target for the Pentagon in the world now? The number 1 is Abdul Malik al-Houthi. Yahya Saree came here. He stayed 40 minutes here. He talked to us. We shook his hands, of course. He talked for about 10-15 minutes, impeccable, repeating, of course, the principled Ansarallah Houthi position. He was not aggressive at all. Wow, extremely impressive, extremely impressive. The other night, the former prime minister came to visit us. He stayed for an hour and a half, answering all our questions. Professor Bin Habtour, who, by the way, wrote, among others, this fantastic book on the war that started in 2015. This is the English version, but unfortunately is only available here in Yemen. So we should find an international publisher, you know, to have this published in the US, for instance. You know, absolutely priceless. And this guy is a towering intellectual, really. And now he's one of the advisors, special advisors. Here we have something that they call the High Political Council with 9 members. Can you believe that we met 4 of them, which is enormous? They talk to us willingly. They answer our questions, everything. And the system, so you have a basic idea of how the system works here. It's a sort of triangle. At the top, you have the supreme leader of Ansarallah, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, who took the post after the death of his older brother. Right below, we have the president. Right below, we have these 9 high political council, but they have to answer to parliament. Then we have a prime minister and parliament and the structures of the government. This is how it works here. So the spiritual and moral guidance comes from the leader. All the very important political decisions is the high political council that is involved, and obviously that involves the Yemeni armed forces as well. So it's a very serious decision process, you know. So everything is carefully scrutinized. Now, before talking to you tonight, when we were talking to one of these members of the political council, the guy is immensely sharp, and unassuming, you know. He's on a wheelchair, health problems, unassuming, very quiet. But when he starts posing his questions, you know that he absolutely knows what he's talking about. So we can imagine that the dialogue at the highest level is really the highest level dialogue. It's not a bunch of clowns talking on signal. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Pepe, you know, given all that you've just outlined here, you know, as we are talking and as you're traveling there, you mentioned it, there's a war going on, and the United States has gone all in on bombing Yemen, in large part because Yemen has stood up in a major way by reinstituting the Red Sea blockade and by launching now missiles almost on the daily into Israel and on U.S. naval carriers. And we're not getting any imagery coming out of the United States or Israel. They keep saying everything's intercepted, nothing is going wrong. But at the same time, Yemen is doing this. Yemen is doing this, and it's obvious.
Yes.
And it's obviously having an impact. So what have you learned? I know that, you know, you're not inside and getting military secrets, but what have you learned about people's impressions about this and how this has all come about? Because many people are shocked that a country that is in the situation that it is, like Yemen, under the threat and the reality of war every single day for over a decade, is able to do something like this. What have you learned about this capacity that the people have to engage in this kind of response?
It's among these qualities that I was trying to outline in the beginning of our conversation: clarity of purpose, moral clarity, spiritual strength, inner strength, total conviction of what they're doing is the only possible reaction to a genocide of, and their own qualification, our brotherly people in Palestine. So obviously, you cannot beat that, because this is a flame. It's an idea. It's a concept. It's a way of living. It's a behavior, and it's a flame, and you cannot extinguish this flame. It's absolutely impossible to explain this to those clowns in whatever American administration we're talking about, the previous one and the current one. It's impervious to them. And these people are very mediocre. And they already proved how mediocre they are. As mediocre as the last bunch, led by the former Secretary of Genocide. These people are the same thing, you know. Whatever happened with that signal bullshit, the fact is, the key of the whole thing is that, let's send a message. We can bomb Yemen because we can. So let's send a message. Why not? So this is how you launch a war nowadays. It's absolutely pathetic in every sense, but it gives you, I would say, the reach and the depth of not only their insensitivity, but their cosmic mediocrity. In fact, it's something that is directly equivalent to what Professor Bin Haptour told me 2 days ago. He was talking about the ancient poles of civilization in Islam. For instance, Baghdad, Beirut, and Cairo. Because of divide and rule, because of wars, they have been reduced to skeletons of what they were when they were great centers of learning and culture. And that was replaced by what? Dubai. Tawdry, bling bling, cheap, stupid kind of money laundering scheme with 5-star hotels. That's it. That explains it very well. And you can transfer this metaphor to the, I would say, the collective IQ of American administrations. So the Yemenis they don't care. It's fascinating because basically they were saying to us in different levels, look, they can do anything against us. They can throw anything they want against us. We don't care. And we will win. You cannot beat people like that. And that is based not only on what they suffered these past 10 years. This is a 3,000-year-old civilization, at least, if not over 4,000. Extremely sophisticated civilizations, including the Sabayans, many of you have learned, which includes the famous Queen of Sheba, one of the great queens in history, along with Queen Arwa. King of Sheba, by the way, she was from Sana. So, so the real Islam, the real Arabia is here. Why do you think the Roman Empire call it here Arabia Felix, happy Arabia? The Romans instinctively understood that the Arabia that mattered was here. It's not up north in those deserts, now ruled by this bling bling cheap Wahhabi family, and they hate Yemenis. They hate Yemenis with a passion because it's the hate of the newcomers, the bling blings, the cheap and the tawdry, towards the old aristocracy, towards the people who have a fantastic, extremely sophisticated civilization for centuries, which they never had. There are a bunch of goats in the desert. And now, because they struck oil, they became rich. So what? But the Yemenis understand this dichotomy and this, I wouldn't put it as rivalry, this astronomic envy of the Saudi ruling family and Saudi circles of power towards Yemen. So they want to destroy. They want to destroy Yemen by all means necessary. For the moment, for instance, there are at least 2 Yemens. The puppet government in Aden controls Aden and around Aden. And Professor Bin Haptour was a very important intellectual in Aden. He came from Aden, and then he installed himself in Sana'a only a few years ago. He said that the city is a ghost of what it was before. The most interesting, important people and traders, I said, they all left because they know that this puppet government over there is not representative of anything. It's representative of the Saudis only. And then there's a sort of third Yemen, and that's even more interesting, which I hope next time I'll have the chance to go. Many of you probably know that the Hadramaut is the home of the Bin Laden clan. But the Hadramaut in history is much more important. Most of the traders and navigators in Yemen, they came from the Hadramaut. And guess who introduced Islam to parts of Africa, to India, and to Southeast Asia? Yemenis from the Hadramaut. And nowadays, what they explain to me is that the Hadramaut is more or less ruled by local sheikhs, local chiefs, local tribes. So there's zero influence from Aden, of course, and it's far away from Sana'a, right? So we can say that there are between 2 and 3 Yemens. So the unity of Yemen, which, by the way, they achieved only in 1990, it's relatively new. And since they achieved a unified Yemen in 1990, the Saudis especially did everything to break up Yemen again. And so this continues. This goes on. And it gets much worse because the Saudis have, leading from behind and now leading from the front line, the Americans. So can you imagine the Yemenis are fighting all that by themselves? It's absolutely mind-boggling how they do it, really. But very, very important. There is a past to all that. For instance, we learned that their best engineers, physicists, etc., they were educated where? USSR and China. So it's a long relationship, you know. And Russia and China, they look at Yemen, and it's not, for the moment, technically you cannot say that they got Ansar Allah's backs, but they won't let Ansar Allah to be shattered. There's no way this is going to happen. We still don't know how, right? But for instance, something that I had no idea, in fact, probably none of us. One of the guys who writes with us is the absolutely extraordinary, he's a great guy, Professor Ma Xiaolin, who is a Hui Chinese. He's a Chinese Muslim born in Ningxia province, and he runs Middle East Center, Middle East Center of Studies in Hangzhou. And the Yemenis took us to a Chinese obelisk on the hills. And I said, what is this obelisk doing there? And Professor Ma gave us the story. Chinese workers during Maoist times who came to Yemen to build infrastructure. This is absolutely extraordinary. This is so it comes back to us immediately. Oh, this is the international proletariat system in action. Of course, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, absolutely. And many of these Chinese workers, they died here. So there is a small cemetery right beside the obelisk. The obelisk is written in Mandarin and in Arabic. There is a cemetery for all the Chinese workers who died here in Yemen building infrastructure for the Yemeni people. Extraordinary. So these ties go a long way back. So Yemenis and Ansar Allah, the Houthis, they have their international connections apart from Iran. For instance, they are not going to tell us how deep is the military, let's say, interconnection between Ansar Allah and Tehran. I could not get a straight answer, and I was not expecting one, because this is a military secret, of course. But the technologies that they have today, they are indigenous. They developed it. They learned, of course, they learned from Iran. They might have learned a few things from the North Koreans. They learned from China. They learned from Russia. But they have a group of first-class scientists here and people who know physics and mathematics, unlike most of the West. And they built their military infrastructure by themselves. This is very, very important. Of course, we, considering that this is the first visit of a group of foreigners, obviously they would not put a military expert from Ansar Allah to talk to us. Obviously. So we got bits and pieces of information, and some of it absolutely fascinating. For instance, right at the beginning, when during a dinner, I was talking to one of the members of the High Political Council, one of the four that we met. And I asked him straight away, do you have underground parallel channels of communication with Russia and China? And his answer, in metaphorical Arabic, of course, I picked my minimalist Arabic, picked a little bit, and I'm not sure that my translator translated it everything. He basically said yes, of course. Obviously, So this, I would say, these remnants of international proletariat integration and communication, they persist in several different levels. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to watch. But the most important thing, once again, after all these meetings, after meeting the people in the streets, the people in the souk, and officials, diplomats, etc., the security people, the people who was hanging around the places where we used to go, is their clarity of purpose. And they know exactly what they're doing. And this is reflected practically in every intervention by the supreme leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi. He, because we are in Ramadan, he speaks basically about Quranic issues. He speaks every night, by the way. Every night at around 8:30, he speaks for about half an hour, 40 minutes, and everybody watches it. Very, very important. But outside of Ramadan, they told me that he also talks about politics as well. And he's very well informed in global politics. Absolutely fascinating, isn't it? So in terms of a learning experience, Danny, wow, I can tell you, it's and of course I managed to get some stuff that I need to be translated from Arabic that is absolutely priceless. They have very few English translations, which adds to an extra problem, which is we all deal with, the lost in translation issue. Because, for instance, Iraq or Lebanon or Palestine were colonized, you find a lot of English speakers. French speakers don't have, nobody speaks French anymore, but a lot of English speakers. So they address the global circus directly. Here, no, here everybody only speaks Arabic. And there are very, very few diplomats and officials, etc., who speak at least a passable English, So this is a problem for them because in the West, nobody hears about it. Nobody hears about it. It's across the global South is different because everybody now is paying attention. Professor Matt told me that Yahya Saree is a mega superstar in China. Everybody knows him in China. He's a hit with everyone, especially young Chinese. So this is very important. People understand where the Ansarallah and the Houthis are coming from. Not to mention Latin America, in Africa, everywhere. So in the global South, they don't even need PR. But in the global North, of course, it's easy to demonize them because you don't hear them. And when you see Yahya Saree, obviously it's an absolutely disgusting translation on top of his image, and we don't even know if it's reflecting what he's saying.
Yes, during in the beginning of this blockade and their campaign to defend Gaza, it was noted that Russian and Chinese vessels were not being targeted, and in large part because Russia and China are very friendly to Yemen, very friendly to its government. Also, do not share the kind of role in supporting Israel that the United States and its allies, so-called, do. Now, you mentioned Pepe, that in this moment that we're in, like a literal war, we have on the one hand Yemen and its resistance being lost in translation. On the other hand, we have things like Signalgate, where you have Pete Hegseth literally saying, and I'll quote this, quote, and this is part of this so-called text exchange. He said, "We are the only ones on the planet on our side of the ledger who can do this, the bombing campaign against Yemen. No one else is even close." And when I hear that, Pepe, and then of course we had the celebrations of the bombings in that text change, fist bumps, fire emojis, all of this nonsense. At the same time, the United States has sent bombers to Diego Garcia, threatening Iran as it's bombing Yemen. You're saying that Yemen is not people that you can beat, and yet the United States is diving head first into this. What is going to be the outcome here in your assessment now that you've had this experience of being on the inside? How is this going to end? Because the United States under Trump, and it would be the same under anyone else, is saying, well, we're strong, we're going to do it, we're beating them. But I'm wondering if the reality is different.
Well, they will have to kill, almost 30 million Yemenis? to win, because I don't know if these figures are correct. According to them, there are more or less 40 million people in Yemen, and 30 million support the Ansarallah and Houthis. So they'll have to kill 30 million people to win. There's no other way, you know. And Ansarallah is like Hezbollah. It's an idea, it's a concept, it's spiritual strength and military force and communal work, social work, which we see many instances. We visited, for instance, the Zakat Authority, which collects the zakat, the voluntary donations according to Islam, and distribute aid to poor people. You cannot kill that. Absolutely not. And this is a nationwide thing. So the moral strengths and the inner strengths of these people, based on their ancient civilization, is something that is absolutely inexplicable to a bunch of clowns in Washington, which only believe in the power of the bombs. By the way, when we were looking at remains of the cancer hospital, there is one unexploded bomb, which they're going to obviously recover and do some reverse engineering on it. And we found fragments. I put it on my Telegram. We found fragments of the American bombs with manufacturer ID and contract number. So this will be tracked by them directly to where these bombs come from, where they were fabricated, etc. And of course, they will have a long list to indict the Americans in an unprovoked, illegitimate, once again, unilateral war. Will this change the configuration of Yemen? No, it won't. Will this change the configuration of the axis of resistance? No, it won't. By the way, there are portraits of Nasrallah everywhere. Even in the old city, in the souk, in front of the souk of the old city, which is about a 15-minute walk from where I am, you know. So this is not going to change. But when they talk about the axis of resistance, first of all, they talk about what Yemen is doing. They never get into detail on the degree of collaboration with other members of the axis of resistance, because their actions and their decisions are specific to Yemen. Nobody else decided to impose a blockade on Ben Gurion Airport or to throw missiles against the USS Truman. This is their own decision. It's the leader and the 9 guys in the high political council, you know. So they are very different from, for instance, you cannot compare what they do to what Iran does. It's totally different. So there is an interconnection and, of course, an alliance of minds, of hearts and minds, no question. But the political decisions and the military decisions are all indigenous. So this points to a degree of sophistication that is very, very high. You know, it's not exactly the definition of barbarians, according to the President of the United States, whose idea of glitz and culture is Mar-a-Lago. And I rest my case.
Yeah. And, you know, Pepe, I wanted to, I get your reaction to what people in Yemen and what your conversations have been like about this so-called signal gate and what it reveals about the United States' effort to, well, the question is to you. What is it really aiming to do? Because in the so-called text chains, it was European freeloading. It was we need tight messaging. It's all about the messaging. Biden, freedom of navigation didn't defend it. It's all Iran funded. What are people's impressions from your travels there about Signalgate and what it all means?
They laughed about it. You know that 10 minutes after the thing was on X, everybody here already knew it. Everybody knew it. The diplomatic circles, the intel circles, the people in the leadership, everybody knew it. And of course, they left politely. You know that a Yemeni smirk like this, you know, with their jambia, the dagger over here, you know. They say, "Oh my God, it's just really a bunch of clowns." They don't take it seriously, and even the fact that, for instance, I was very worried in our conversation. I said, "Are you aware that now the so-called empire, the most important empire in the history of the universe, according to them, they want to destroy it completely?" They said, "Well, so what?" Literally, you know, so what? Because they know it's impossible. They trust their capabilities. They trust especially their resistance. If we are talking about the meaning of resistance on a global level, this is the capital of the resistance. Absolutely. Absolutely. It beats anything else, you know. And nothing is going to deviate them from this purpose, which is, in their own way, try to alleviate the genocide in Palestine. They know that they won't be able to stop it. They're very realistic. But at least they are trying to do physically what nobody else is doing. And now they're paying with Yemeni lives, literally, right? They're absolutely conscious of all that. And that is something that I would say in every one of his daily speeches, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, Al-Houthi is reminding everybody what this is all about. And obviously, everyone will have to pay a price, because the vengeance of the empire is already, you know, off limits, and it's going to be even worse from now on. But, you know, and they tell us the same story. Look, what this past 10 years, do you know that according to their calculations, in 10 years since 2015, the start of the war by the Saudis and the Emiratis, this coalition destroyed 45,000 buildings in Yemen, which gives us what, 4,500 a year. I think it's quite credible as a figure, you know. And when we see results of the hits a little bit everywhere, it makes total sense. Absolutely. And of course, because of the total blockade, because of the harassment, because of the bombings and all that, Yemen is, which is naturally wealthy, naturally rich, is very poor. But they know why, especially because of the House of Saud. Absolutely. They mobilized all the resources of the Saudi Wahhabis to try to destroy Yemen, and eventually annex Yemen for them, which leads us to another very important problem: what's happening to the Isle of Socotra in the south, which is being annexed by the UAE as we speak. And there's not much that the Houthis or Ansar can do about that. It's too far away. It's closer to Aden. In fact, if the Saudis don't like it, the Saudis could do something about it. But the Saudis don't have an army in Aden, for instance. And the Emiratis are putting a lot of money to colonize Socotra. This is a very long-term problem. And it comes back to the same, I would say, British-inspired, British-derived, and British allied divide and rule, which the Saudis continue after the British left. So the Yemenis have a very good experience of colonization, recolonization, and imposed colonialism. And they have to deal with it still on a daily basis. So comes an empire of upstarts and start bombing them. This is the least of their problems, the way they see it. You know, of course, it's not going to be. If CENTCOM goes really hardcore, they can flatten whole areas of Yemen, or especially the area where we were, the Sada Governorate, which is let's say, the birthplace of Ansar Allah. I really fear about the people who live there, because there will be many more attacks on civilian buildings with the same lame excuse, military targets, a weapons depot, all that crap, And what we saw for ourselves here and in Sada were residential buildings or hospitals. Not a single military target.
Yeah. And if the Trump administration does in these next subsequent 3+ years exactly what you said could happen, it's another forever war that the Trump administration has dived right into. And that gets me, for our last 10 or so minutes, Pepe, maybe we could talk about the global significance of all of this, because these signal leaks have, of course, been spoken about mainly in the sense of how could the United States have allowed this? It's incompetence by Pete Hegseth and Vance and the rest. At the same time, though, this IDF former volunteer journal, now turned quote unquote journo of the Atlantic, he's
absolutely filthy, this guy.
It's essentially what he did is he showed war planning in real time in the way that the United States does its business.
This was given to him, Danny. This was fed to him. This was fed. Everybody knows that this was fed to him. These people cannot get a scoop.
He was added to the group.
So this points to CIA, MI6, or CIA in conjunction with MI6 op. Don't forget that Signal is a CIA op from the beginning. And this myth that they don't have back doors, it was another myth perpetrated by themselves to say, look, this is the safest. I use Signal as well. I never trusted Signal. Signal. But the people that I used Signal talking to Americans. And the Americans I was talking to on Signal, they all believe that, look, we have to go on Signal because then nobody knows the bullshit. CIA was spying on everybody on Signal. So,
Yemen, the Yemeni armed forces, they've said that the reason why these leaks came out were to deflect from the military problems that they're actually having. The United States in particular, the U.S. Navy, and of course Israel now being caught up once again because of its genocide and the missiles that are being launched there. Talk about this to close here, maybe for the next 10 minutes. A lot of people are talking about the threat of war with Iran while there is a literal war happening on Yemen and the explosion in West Asia in general. How does this fit in this multipolar picture that you're analyzing now that you've had this visit? Because in a sense, it feels like, and it seems like, exactly what many people were hoping was not going to happen. The United States operating as this unipolar power, attempting to essentially go scorched earth to preserve its dominance. What's your impression about what's been going on now that you've had this monumental experience?
You cannot change the mentality of an empire, especially a dying empire, Danny. It's impossible. These are cosmetic changes in the White House. It doesn't mean anything. Now we have a sort of a revolt of very powerful silos of the deep state against Trump 2.0. And they're going to fight him very, very hard because they want their forever wars to go along. Trump and the Zionists behind him, they have other forever wars in mind, which in their mind is going to be, let's say, a flash war. Because these idiots actually believe that they can launch strikes against Iran and they're going to win. They actually believe that. And even worse, they're manipulators in Tel Aviv, the psychopathological, apocalyptic, messianic, Old Testament, demented or whatever. They actually believe in that. The book told them, So the book told them we have to go there and whatever they say. It's more enlightening to watch a Daffy Duck cartoon, So that's what is dangerous, because we are dealing with a bunch of irrational people who have still a lot of power and who are behind an American administration, again, to implement their own agenda and obviously dragging this new American administration to fulfill their wet dreams. This is extremely, extremely dangerous. And well, I have to start digging again next week. This past 10 days for me was only Yemen, and I'm still deep into it. And I haven't even written a word about it because I haven't had time. I'm still processing what I'm going to write about that. After that, then we're back to business, which is, okay, are these clowns going to launch strike on Iran in the next 2 to 3 months? There's a very strong possibility. And they actually believe in it. And so far, the only one that I heard that got the why in the story, well, we are friends, we are always talking, was Alistair Crook. Because he said the window of opportunity is until spring, before the whole JCPOA thing, renewal, not renewal, more sanctions, is absolutely correct. This window of opportunity we have what, April, May, June. Oh my God, this is going to be really hardcore, because the irrationals on the other side, they actually believe that they would be successful in terms of not necessarily crippling the Iranian nuclear program, because they cannot do that. But even worse, decapitating the leadership in Tehran. They actually believe that they can do in Tehran what they did with the leadership of Hezbollah. And the people around Trump, they actually also believe in it. That's what makes it so dangerous. It's the childish dream of an easy victory, and we can get away with it. Well, because these idiots don't know anything about geoeconomics. They have no idea about the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz. They have no idea that Iran has at least 5,000 missiles already pointed to all the American military bases in West Asia. Obviously, they don't see that. They don't see that if you block the Strait of Hormuz, you collapse the global economy as a whole. Obviously, no. And there's nobody there to explain to them, right? And these people don't read on top of it. So that's what makes it so dangerous. And yes, Yemen it's a diversionary tactic, because people then start concentrating on the war in Yemen, and they are not paying attention to what they are planning to do against Iran. And of course, this thing that we're going to have a deal in Ukraine until the end of April. What kind of deal? Are they nuts? Do you think the Russians are going to accept this piece of shit that they are proposing? Obviously not. Once again, extremely misinformed people who believe in their own fantasies, not linked to reality, clownish and amateurish. So this next 2 to 3 months, wow.
Yeah.
This is going to be quite something, and extremely dangerous, no question. But from the point of view of Sana, they look, of course, at this bigger picture. They know that Iran is the big target. They know that they may be the smaller target, but they still are a very big target. But they look at it and say, okay, we can cope with it. It's amazing. It floors you how direct, how straight up, and their integrity. And I said, wow, are they trying to force us to renege our principles? No, we won't. So basically, we can explain their whole position as a moral war. Do we have any moral wars in the 21st century? No, we don't. And in fact, from their point of view, it's a defensive war. It's not a war. They didn't launch anything. They launched a counter-offensive to try to make the other irrational side see some sense, which they won't. But in the end, the whole affair is moral, spiritual, based on humanitarian values, brotherly respect to brotherly people, and all that. So, in this sense, we can say that it's part of the essence of Islam. And every serious Islamologist will tell you that the real Islam came from Yemen, and it was spread by Yemen historically. Not obviously this demented variations that came afterwards, from Wahhabis to Deobandis to Al-Qaeda configurations, whatever. No, this has nothing to do with Islam. The purity of Islam and the purity of helping the needy, in the sense that we saw the authority of Zakat here receiving donations to help poor people. They have a national database of poor people in Iran that can come to their offices. For instance, a family of 5, in need, unemployed, etc. They have to feed the children. They need clothes and all that. They register. They have a digital card. They go to one of these offices. They can get clothes and food and all that. Then at the end, they show their card to a controller. He puts the whole information on the screen, and that's it. And they can take away the help. It's very sophisticated. It's equivalent to what you have in the most sophisticated countries in the West. Yeah. And it's about helping the poor, helping the needy.
Which is what you don't have in the West.
I'm sorry. What? Danny?
I say, which is what you don't have. Which is what you don't have as much in the West, helping the poor and the needy.
Definitely not. Especially in the U.S., where it's still cowboy individualism.
Pepe, we can close on this final point of mine, and then if you have any final reactions on it, while my reaction to Singlegate
midnight, and it has.
Freedom. Today is Thursday, March 27th, 2025. Colonel Douglas McGregor joins us now. Colonel, it's been a tumultuous week, and I've been waiting all week to be able to chat with you. Thank you very much for accommodating my schedule with your own. I want to spend some time talking to you about the American preparation, the American military preparation for war against Iran. But before we get there, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you questions about national security and the security of defense plans. So wouldn't operational plans for a military attack be considered secret and to be preserved from unwanted eyes, whether technically classified as classified or not?
No, Judge, you're getting to something that's very important. And this entire event was a real surprise to me, because my experience, which goes back into the 90s and the early years of this century, was that any time a senior officer speaks to another senior officer or to a senior appointed official, Secretary of Defense, Undersecretary, whatever it happens to be, you conduct those conversations over secure lines. That it's automatic. And the reason for that is very simple, that while the stated objective or theme of the meeting may not be classified, inevitably you may go in or wander into that territory. It's natural, because people have access to classified information. They bring that up, they discuss it because it impinges on the decision or on the planning. So whether or not, strictly speaking, you're holding a classified conversation, senior officials, as I said, always went through encrypted lines or secure lines. I've never seen anything like this before.
Colonel, tell me if this comment from the Secretary of Defense is consistent with your own understanding of what you just described. You described a high level of acute awareness of the need to secure conversations about military movements. The Secretary of Defense has a slightly different view. Chris, cut number 13.
Nobody's texting war plans. Well, I noticed this morning, out came something that doesn't look like war plans. And as a matter of fact, they even changed the title to attack plans because they know it's not war plans. There's no units, no locations, no routes, no flight paths, no sources, no methods, no classified information.
Put aside the body language. I mean, you can't really, well, what do you think of what he said? He's trying to gainsay the fact that this was an operational plan with timing and military equipment listed, but because it didn't include other things, somehow it doesn't fulfill the requirement of an attack plan.
First of all, he's in territory he's not familiar with. Let's face it. Mr. Hegseth has not operated at high levels in the Department of Defense or in the Intelligence Committee or State Department or anywhere else that I'm familiar with. So I don't think he has the background and the experience that he probably needs to fully grasp what he's done. And obviously, he's trying to defend himself against attacks. And I certainly understand how he feels because he's watching people attack him for what he considers to be modest or minor in the way that people formerly attacked members of the Biden administration, where it was Lloyd Austin or somebody else on what he considers to be equally specious grounds. The point is, though, Judge, he's wrong. And, I've been involved in some of these things. I've stood next to a senior officer who was directed to call the Secretary of Defense. And it was not over what you would call classified matter at all. It had no classification whatsoever. But both sides understood that he was going to get guidance from the Secretary of Defense that should be treated as at least as confidential. And it's not something that the rest of the world needs to hear. And so ultimately, whether he likes it or not, he and everyone else who participated in this disaster looked foolish and unprofessional and amateurish. That's the bottom line. Now, should somebody be removed for being part of this? That's a matter for the President of the United States to decide. I don't know what he will do, but I would suggest that whoever set this up, first and foremost, probably deserves to be on the chopping block. And then the question is, why would anybody go onto something like Signal or any other non-secure line outside of the Defense Department to discuss any of these matters? All of this bodes ill for the administration, makes us look foolish, and it actually robs the president to some extent of maneuver room when he makes decisions to do or not do something.
Right. Chris, run the clip of National Security Advisor Waltz with Laura Ingraham. Do we have that?
So your staffer did not put his contact information.
No,
but how did it end up in your
that's
phone?
what we're trying to figure out.
Okay, but that's a pretty big problem.
That's what we've got the best technical minds, right?
That's disturbing.
And that's where, I'm sure everybody out there has had a contact where it was said one person and then a different phone number.
But you've never talked to him before, so how's the number on your phone? I'm not an expert in any of this, but it's just curious. How's the number on your phone?
Well, if you have somebody else's contact and then then somehow it gets
someone
sucked
sent
in.
You that
it gets
contact.
sucked in.
Was there someone else supposed to be on the chat that wasn't on the chat
Lots.
that you thought was?
So
on
the
chat?
person that I thought was on there was never on there. It was this
who
guy.
was that? What person?
Well, I'm not. Look,
Okay.
Laura, I take responsibility. I built the group.
Okay.
So.
This was not a 15-minute phone call, Colonel. This was a series of text messages that went on for a couple of days. That's Mike Waltz with Jeff Goldberg, the reporter for The Atlantic. I don't know Mr. Goldberg. I know a lot of conservative Republicans despise him. However, he was a mouthpiece for Vice President Cheney's pro-Iraq, pro-Afghanistan propaganda, if you will. I don't know if Waltz is going to be on the chopping block, but I think he made things worse with this nonsense about data being sucked from one phone to the next. I'd like you to watch Congressman Crow, himself a former Navy SEAL, interrogating Director Gabbard. She looks like she'd rather be anywhere else on the planet than listening to this. And I thought the interrogation was nothing short of brilliant. Cut number 10.
Director Gabbard, I want to direct your attention again to the text chain where it says, just confirmed with CENTCOM, we are a go for mission launch. Does that indicate to you that there is about to be a military operation?
Yes.
Director Gabbard, earlier in this hearing, we heard about the DoD's classification standards. I want to now turn my attention to your classification standards. You're the Director of National Intelligence. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence classification guide says, quote, information providing indication or advance warning that the U.S. or its allies are preparing for an attack, end quote, is to be classified as top secret. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Director Gabbard, have the Houthis indicated an ability to shoot down American aircraft?
Yes.
They have in fact done so, haven't they?
Yes.
Including MQ-9 Reapers, haven't they?
That's correct.
And that was one of the systems used in the attack recently that's the subject of this discussion, is it not?
Correct.
Colonel, can the case be made that the Secretary of State committed espionage by failing to safeguard military secrets? There are two, as you know, espionage statutes. One prohibits the willful failure to safeguard. The other prohibits the negligent failure to safeguard.
Potentially, I suppose it is, could be prosecuted, certainly for negligence, which is what I would chalk this up to. Again, you're talking about people without much experience that are in jobs that are way beyond anything they've ever done before. And they're doing things that they did when they were civilians. And that's just an impossibility now. You can't even walk out of your office and make an off-the-cuff statement if you're the Secretary of Defense or the Director of the CIA, Director of National Intelligence, Secretary of State. Whatever you say, your words have to be carefully chosen. Now, they don't seem to understand that anything at that high level involving any potential action or policy that the White House may direct should be treated at least as extremely confidential, if not top secret, which means, again, you go back to the network that you know is encrypted. I'm surprised that whoever works for Secretary Hegseth did not go to him and say, look, you really need to reconsider this discussion and let's put it on the secure network. But then again, he may have done these things without consulting anybody in his office. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I feel badly for Tulsi Gabbard. She's trying to be a loyal member of the Trump team. And there's only so much that she can do. And she has to answer truthfully. And she did. What she said is correct.
I feel sorry for her, too. The person who needs to answer truthfully is the Secretary of Defense. I mean, the Vice President expressed an opinion, a good one. Maybe we should caution against this. Maybe we shouldn't be doing it. Aside from what he said, there's no conversation about the lawfulness, morality, or military necessity of bombing this residential neighborhood in Yemen.
Well, Judge, those things never come up. I'm sorry to say. I've never heard anybody bring up those kinds of matters. Because remember, especially the people in the military, but the people in the Department of Defense are treating whatever policy decision is made as a foregone conclusion and sacrosanct. So the notion that you would raise that is just not very probable on the defense side. I'm glad that the representative of the vice president said what he did. And that's probably the one modest bright light in an otherwise extremely dark sky in this whole matter.
Yeah. Colonel, is the United States preparing for war against Iran?
No, I think so. I don't think there's any question about that, unfortunately. Now, you and I know that this has been going on for a long time, and we've had similar buildups in the past. Yeah, the other thing is the Iranians have allegedly been within a week or 2 weeks or 10 days of having a nuclear weapon off and on for a decade at least. I don't know how many times I've listened to someone from the Israeli government or one of their supporters inside the United States make that argument. But this looks very serious. An enormous amount of firepower is being assembled. I think it's unfortunate that we photograph bombers and ships and other things that are being assembled for an attack and then broadcast that through our media. I wish we would not do that. If I were Secretary of Defense, I would ask the media not to do that, and I probably would ban them from any of the installations where the firepower is being assembled. Unfortunately, it's too late. That's been done. And we don't understand that allegedly the Iranians have missiles that with a maximum range for precision guidance of 2,000 kilometers. That's great. Diego Garcia is just beyond that range. But the next level, the next ranging level for missiles that both the Russians and the Chinese have, which they could conceivably turn over to the Iranians, is 5,000 kilometers. Now, if those missiles are on hand or they've already been provided, we just don't know. That means that when you assemble aircraft or ships or anything else within that range, they're at risk of being destroyed. And what's to stop an enemy from destroying your aircraft on the tarmac, on the runway before they ever get a chance to get into the air? So I'm very uncomfortable with all these pictures. I think somebody probably in Washington says, well, this is great. We're intimidating the Iranians. I don't see much evidence for that intimidation. What I see is evidence for revealing too much of what you might do. But that's a problem we have. It's not a new one. We had it during World War II. Interrogations of German senior officers indicated that some of the most valuable intelligence they had during the war came right out of newspapers in the United States.
Colonel, several of our colleagues on this show have stated that among the last advice that Bill Burns, who's the former U.S. ambassador to Moscow and for 4 years was the director of the CIA under President Biden, gave to Director Gabbard and Director Ratcliffe was his opinion that the Iranians do not have a nuclear weapon. Would the United States follow the political needs of Prime Minister Netanyahu over its own intelligence assessments as to what they're targeting, what they're bombing, who they're trying to kill, what they're trying to prevent?
Well, there's certainly a large body of evidence to suggest that that's the case. I mean, we have to ask the question, why would we want to create this tension that can only lead ultimately to the development of a nuclear weapon, not just in Iran, but in many other countries? I mean, if you watch the United States over the last 20, 30 years, the real lesson that you take away from all of it is that if you don't have a nuclear weapon, you are at risk of being destroyed from the air, invaded on the ground, destroyed from the sea. So you ought to invest in a nuclear weapon. And that's why I don't think any of these so-called intimidation tactics work. I think it has the opposite effect. And I think that's what we're witnessing right now today in Iran. And it may be that inside Iran, in that inner circle, someone has said, we have to be ready very, very shortly to field our own nuclear warheads, because if we don't, we risk being destroyed. Wow. I hope that's not the case, but I worry a great deal about that.
Does Israel risk being destroyed if Israel and the United States attack Iran? I mean, it'd be one thing for Iran to attack the United States, given the enormous distance, but quite another for Iran to attack Tel Aviv.
Well, remember, I think the last time we talked, I pointed out to some underlying assumptions that are not questioned either in Israel or in Washington. And those assumptions include the Arabs, the Muslim states in general in the region can be bullied. They can be pushed. They can be steamrolled into whatever direction we care to go with impunity. That's number one. Number two, our
does that include the Turks?
I think it does. But on the other hand, you have to consider the possibility that we regard the Turks as having been sufficiently bribed or bought off in Syria so as to keep them on side. I mean, remember, it's always a question of bribe, bully, and then bomb. Bomb is the last step if the bribes and the bullying doesn't work. But the second thing is that there's this assumption that we are irresistible, invincible, that the combination of Israeli and American military power, specifically American, cannot be resisted, cannot be defeated. You know, those assumptions I think are dangerous, and we may yet, excuse me, we may yet get a demonstration of just how inaccurate those assumptions are.
Colonel, what do you think would be the reaction in Moscow or Beijing to an American attack on Tehran?
I think Russia will stand by Iran. They have a mutual defense pact. We don't know the details, all the various codicils and statements in the pact, but I think it's pretty clear that from the Russian standpoint, Iran is the keystone and the edifice of the region. Remember, we talked previously about this road, which consists of rail lines as well as road that runs from the Indian Ocean coast of Iran straight up through Iran, all the way through the Caucasus and into Russia, that can carry oil, gas, all sorts of things in both directions, and then ultimately reach Europe. And again, Iran also sits astride routes between the East and the West. From the Chinese standpoint, Persia was always the key player on the Silk Road. And in fact, once you left Chinese territory, the lingua franca for hundreds of years of that Silk Road was Persian or Farsi, was never Chinese. So I don't see the Russians under any circumstances abandoning Iran. And if we think they will, we're wrong. And again, I think this is one of the reasons that President Trump wanted a rapid conclusion to the war in Ukraine, in the hopes that he could formulate an agreement that would satisfy Russian national security interests and urge the Russians to stay out of any confrontation with Iran. Well, that's obviously failed. While we're doing many good things in Riyadh, and I think the team down there really is negotiating good things with the Russians for the future, from the standpoint of the United States, and I would argue Europe, towards normalizing relations. Right. The problem is that this war drags on. And we don't seem to understand that this war is not going to end, frankly, until you get rid of Zelensky. He and his cabal and his backers in Western Europe are keeping this thing going.
Don't the Chinese receive a fair amount of oil from Iran, and wouldn't they do what they had to prevent that from being interrupted?
Well, they have a flotilla, a naval flotilla. It's not very large, but it is in the Indian Ocean, right at the mouth of the Straits of Hormuz. I don't know the distribution of submarines, but I suspect Russian and Chinese submarines are also in those waters. So yes, the Chinese absolutely oppose any obstruction of access to the Straits of Hormuz. By the way, so do the Koreans and the Japanese and others who depend on that oil and natural gas.
I hope that gaggle of people on the text chat, about which we spoke earlier in this conversation, are intelligent enough to realize the risks of bombing Iran and to inform the president of those risks, rather than blithely saying, as they seem to on the chat, with the exception of the vice president, whose hesitance I commend, tell us when you want the bombs to fly. I mean, they have to know what you're talking about. They have to understand the extraordinary risk of just blithely going along with what the Netanyahu regime wants.
Well, you're addressing one problem, which is obviously the powerful influence of Netanyahu, the Israel lobby, on the White House and the Hill. That's clear.
Right.
There's another problem that is unspoken, but is unavoidable in this discussion, and that is that we tend to treat target sets delivered to us largely by the Air Force as a substitute for strategic planning. In other words, we've forgotten strategy. We've forgotten the questions of purpose, method, end state. We don't go down that road thoroughly enough so that you arrive at a destination that says, if you do X and Y, you have these potential outcomes, and you may not be able to control it. Instead, we look at target sets. Oh, look at the targets that we struck. That was mentioned during the text discussion, where they were celebrating the death of somebody that was supposedly a high-ranking member of the Yemeni or Houthi government. He went into a building to, quote unquote, see his girlfriend, and we destroyed the building. Treating that as a strategic outcome. That's not a strategic outcome. That does not get you somewhere. It does not promote a solution. It does not answer the questions of strategic interest. And this is the problem. There are too many people that have been treating target sets. We went through this in Vietnam. We bomb X, Y, and Z, and the enemy will understand. We'll send a message, and we'll bomb here, 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 and the enemy will get it. It doesn't work. It failed in Vietnam. Ultimately, it failed in Iraq, which is why we ended up with this ground invasion, or at least that's an excuse for it. And I don't see much evidence that it's been successful anywhere else. These are not real strategic solutions.
Sounds as though the president has not surrounded himself with people of a sufficient level of intellectual maturity and personal experience to delve into this deadly business of killing people overseas. It certainly the conversation sounded high schoolish to me, but I had a security clearance, but I never participated in a conversation about killing people.
No, I think you're right. And if you go back and read George Kennan's observations and comments on the discussions held in the kitchen cabinet with LBJ about Vietnam, he reached a similar conclusion and ultimately threw up his hands. In other words, it's difficult. It's very difficult for leaders in the United States that are very heavily dependent upon air and naval power to understand that those instrumentalities are not an answer to a strategic dilemma, that there has to be another way. That's why interests have to be understood. It's why we continue to not understand the Russians, because we're not really listening. We're too busy developing messages we want to send to them or messages to Iran. We don't listen. If you don't listen, you don't get any answers. And that's where we are right now. The answer then becomes a target set. Show me the target sets again. I want to make sure one more time. And you watch a civilian appointee or an Air Force general who is just enthralled with the idea of bombing any opportunity they get and says, oh, well, this target, if we destroy this, that'll bring down the whole regime. If we hit these people here, that will decapitate the regime. How many times have we heard that nonsense? And how often does it fail? Every time.
Colonel McGregor, thank you for your time, my dear friend. Thank you for your courageous and insightful comments. Deeply and profoundly appreciated.
Shall we talk Ark of the Covenant? Because I've been waiting to talk about this all day. New CIA documents just resurfaced from 1988 that claims the Ark of the Covenant is real, and we have a location for it. Sounds like something out of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, but it's true. And the CIA, according to these reports, says the Ark was confirmed to exist through remote viewing, describing a gold-covered chest guarded by powerful beings in an underground Middle Eastern chamber. Joining us now to unpack this explosive story is Jason Shurka, author of The Pyramid Code. Welcome back, Jason. Two crazy big stories that I'm in love with. We talked about the Egyptian pyramids this week, earlier in the week with you, and now we've got the Ark of the Covenant. It seems crazy. First of all, what do you think this revelation means, this CIA document? And maybe I'll ask you, do you think they're also maybe releasing this information now to distract us from something else?
I'm very glad you brought that up because it was a point that I was going to share, and I'm sure people have different perspectives on it. But let's cover what this thing is first, and then we can go over, again, just the factual essence of what's going on here. What do we know? What are we being told? What could be false? And 2 times in a week, how does this connect to exactly what was written in the Pyramid Code? So we know that in the Pyramid Code document, it already spoke exactly about what was underneath the pyramids. Well, it spoke about the Ark of the Covenant as well, with its exact location, where you can find it, and what it entails. So what the CIA actually declassified in those documents, once again, is not new information. It's just a big organization and agency coming out saying, hey, look, this is what we did. And by the way, we did it like 40 years ago in 1988. So this project is called Project Sunstreak, like streaking the sun. And it's using something called psychoenergetics. So you called something called remote viewing. Remote viewing is essentially this thing that is weird to most people, but it's very real. I've worked with remote viewers before. A lot of agencies work with remote viewers to find things that they can't find through traditional mechanisms, like missing bodies. I work with somebody named Patricia Mona. She found 30 missing bodies for the RCMP in Canada when they couldn't find it themselves. And it's all done through this really weird mechanism, but it works because these very big agencies actually use them.
Yeah, the CIA. The CIA has been using remote viewing for years.
For a long time. This is not wacky stuff.
Yeah.
It's not wacky stuff, but it sounds wacky because we just don't understand. What do you mean projecting consciousness out to a specific coordinate of longitude and latitude and being able to understand exactly what's there? So they did this in 1988, and I want to read something real quick from their actual declassified documents from December 5th, 1988. It was a session by, they don't give us the name, but it's called Remote Viewer Number 32, which means they used over 30 people in this experiment to do it. This specific session lasted 90 minutes from 9:15 a.m. to 10:45 a.m. on December 5th, 1988. And it says the following. Target is a container. The target is what they're looking for on the longitude and latitude lines. This container has another container inside of it. The target is fashioned of wood, gold, and silver. The target is similar in shape to a coffin and is decorated with seraphim, which are like these gold-looking statues. This target is located somewhere in the Middle East, as the language spoken by individuals present seemed to be Arabic. Visuals of surrounding buildings indicated the presence of mosque domes. I'm going to tell you right now that I know people are talking about, is it in Ethiopia? Because there's a lot of, Arabic speaking people over there. No, it's under the Dome of the Rock. And I'll tell you how we know that in a second. But it continues on by saying the target is hidden, underground, dark and wet were all aspects of the location of the target. The purpose of the target is to bring the people together, meaning a religious object. It has something to do with ceremony, memory, homage, the resurrection. There is an aspect of spirituality, information, lessons, and historical knowledge far beyond what we know. And then it goes on by explaining something which I can elaborate on further of what this means. The target is protected by entities and energies and can only be opened by those who are authorized to do so. This container will not/cannot be opened until the time is deemed correct. Once it is time to open the container, the mechanics of the lock system will be found to be fairly simple. Individuals opening the container by prying or striking are destroyed, meaning they die, by the container's protectors, meaning its energies, through the use of a power unknown to us. Now, it sounds weird, but that's coming from the CIA. Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
this is like the sword and the stone.
Someone in the chat
Only
says,
the right people can pull it out and the wrong people will be punished. And again, I get the vision of Atreyu going through those, remember? Never ending
Sphinxes. Never ending story.
Yes, when he goes through the Sphinx, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's like only those authorized. This is amazing. Sorry, I got excited.
So,
it's Indiana Jones in real life. That's what's going on here.
I know someone in the chat said, man, Redacted, you guys became the woke History Channel. I don't know about that, but I'll take the History Channel piece of it. I'm thrilled about that. I mean, again, these are CIA documents, right? And so using these remote viewers and the documents before this, I mean, this has been around for a long, long time for people laying claim to what actually this ark means and does and holds. But I'm curious about these beings that are sort of guarding this thing. Do we have any more information about what these beings might be that are guarding this thing? What kind of energies?
Yeah, so I think that word is not the proper word to use. You're talking about something that is a very highly spiritual object and artifact. I call it a form of technology. And when you deal in that world, think about it scientifically as frequencies. There are certain frequencies that some people can touch and some people cannot, because if you don't have the proper vehicle to do it, it will literally electrocute you and kill you. For example, there are some people like monks who can walk on fire and not get burned, but me and you may walk on fire and we're going to get burned. That's what we're talking about with certain energies embedded into this thing. Remember, we're talking 3,000-4,000 years ago. This is around the same time of the pyramids as well. We're talking about a civilization, a society, a people that did things in a way that we do not understand today because it's forgotten knowledge. But what's interesting over here, when it comes to understanding its location as well, which is important, is, yeah, there are some people saying, it might be in Ethiopia. We don't really know. Well, the CIA documents are talking about it underneath some sort of dome, some big mosque in the Middle East. And then here's where the diversion, the distraction comes in. They say it might be here, it might be there, we don't really know. So I'm going to read something from a Daily Mail article that came out just the other day about this topic. And then I want to show you what the Pyramid Code has to say about this, because once again, just like it was on the money with what was underneath the pyramids, it did it once again in a few days. So it's speaking about, according to legend, Queen of Sheba and Israel's King Solomon, so this is history, gave birth to Menelik in her country of origin, but he later traveled to Jerusalem to study with his father. While there, he supposedly stole the ark and brought it back to Axum in Ethiopia. Locals say it has resided in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion ever since. But then the British scholar of Semitic languages and Ethiopian studies, Edward Ullendorf, claimed that he saw the ark inside the church during World War II. But a source close to Ullendorf later revealed that the artifact he saw was nothing more than a replica. What he saw was what you find in any Ethiopian church. It's a model of the Ark of the Covenant because they have replicas all over the place. They have decoys all over the place because you're talking about something of extremely high, not just historical significance, but spiritual significance as well. So in the Pyramid Code, a few days ago, we spoke about what was underneath the pyramids, and we cited certain things from that document that came out 5 years ago. Listen to what it says over here. King Solomon, King David's son, manifested the idea of the first holy temple, but it came at a heavy price to the people of the nation. The first holy temple was composed of 3 main parts: the main hall, the second part of the temple was the main temple, which contained certain objects, and the third part of the temple was known as the Holy of Holies, in which the Ark of the Covenant was. However, over time, and now I'm going to the bottom, it specifically says the place itself, which is known as the foundation stone, in the Dome of the Rock. So the Dome of the Rock, if you read over there, the Holy of Holies, also known as the Dvir in Hebrew, sat on what we know today as the foundation stone. In Hebrew, it's called Even Hashtiyah, within the Dome of the Rock as we know it today. The foundation was used as a stand for the Dvir. The foundation stone had and still has very strong powers, and its geographical location is the energy center of our planet, as well as the energy center of everything as a whole. But here's where it gets interesting. If you go down, it says, in a straight line, deep underground, exactly what the remote viewer said, are the contents of the Holy of Holies, which are concealed there until this very day. The room in which these items are hidden, like the rest of the temple, was designed by King Solomon. And further conversations, if you want to call them, about the Pyramid Code, which is the series on Unified TV, further explain exactly where it is, roughly 180 feet below the base of the foundation stone, which is what the Dome of the Rock is actually built around on right now. It's called the Dome of the Rock because it's a massive dome over the foundation stone.
Now, something that Candace Owens has been reporting on quite a bit lately is that a lot of the destruction of the Middle East right now by globalist powers, what she thinks is to purposely destroy Christian artifacts in this area. So this feels like a link to me. What do you think of it? I know you're not a war expert, but what are your thoughts on where the war is currently targeted?
Yeah, but we could use logic to understand certain things. And what we know is, again, factually, like the center of war in the world is there in the Middle East. It's
yes.
This aspect of everything around Israel. Everybody's fighting over it. And the three main monotheistic religions, which is Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, all look at that place as this is our place. We got to ask ourselves, why did they go? If you go according to history, before it became a mosque, it was the Holy Temple. Why did they choose to build it there around the foundation stone specifically? What did they know that we don't know today? And the answer is a whole lot. And over time, we'll figure that out. But what I believe is the answer to your question is there's a lot of war around there because there's a lot of power given to the very individuals who control that. And that's what they're really fighting over. This isn't about Jews versus Muslims. It's not a religious war within people. That's how we're used to fight each other in this game of divide and conquer. But what's really going on is, in my opinion, there are powers that be that we do understand control the world when it comes to energy sectors, oil, gas, water, and so on and so forth. Those same people want to make sure, just like a lot of other things are not found out by the masses, that this is not found out either. And that's why I think they're moving people towards saying, well, it's in Ethiopia, look over there, don't look over here. But everything shows us that we're here. And if we look at what happened in January of 2011, this is a very famous video, and this is weird, but it's on camera from multiple angles. There was this big orb of light that today they call UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon. They used to call them UFOs. Nobody knows what it was. But this video was very, very highly spoken about in January of 2011 when it happened, right over the top of the Dome of the Rock, hovering there for a while, staying there, and then boom, it just shoots up at a speed that we cannot comprehend in modern day physics. So my question is, why over there? What's so special about the Dome of the Rock? And if we look at history, we understand the power of the foundation stone. We understand the power of that geographical location, and everything shows us that it's there. Why are they telling us it's somewhere else? To divert our attention. That's my opinion.
Someone in our chat room says, people forget, News and Prep says, people forget there were two arcs according to the book of Joshua. And Strat Comgru says, hey, Jason, this guy claims the ark is located under the rock of the dome. There's been high energetic emissions coming out from under the ice in Antarctica for 3+ years that they cannot explain. Maybe it's there as well, or maybe, who knows? I don't know. Antarctica is very fascinating to me.
Antarctica was a base that was known to be a base for the Nazis in the 30s. And over time, that base was then taken over from the Germans to the Americans. If you look at what's going on in Antarctica, why did the Nazis have a base over there? Well, they could have had a base anywhere. It's very, very hard to get to. So you can do a lot of things that you don't want anybody figuring out. Just like they did it 100 years ago, they're still doing things there today. What they're doing, I don't know. But if you look at the Sean Ryan show, he's brought on whistleblowers that worked in Antarctica, explaining certain technologies that they're actually experimenting with today that have very, very high energy emissions. So it could be that. I don't think it's that. I think that they're using that as a base like they were 100 years ago with other forms of technologies today. And it's very convenient because nobody can get there.
Jason, we'll get you out of here on this. Someone in the chat room just said, hey, Patricia says, you guys are talking about demonic forces. You better stop. Do you think that what's related to the ark is some sort of a demonic force? Is there any evidence in any of these CIA documents that that's what the case is?
No, I think people call what they don't understand demonic. I think that we can call it that if we choose to not understand what's going on. You can also use very good things in very bad ways. Just like you can use a knife to kill somebody, you can use a knife to make a salad. doesn't mean the knife is bad. It means the consciousness and the intentions of the operator is bad. And there's a very big distinction between the two. So I would say for anybody that wants to learn more, read those CIA documents, read the Pyramid Code because it explains this in depth, and watch the Pyramid Code on Unified TV. It's really powerful stuff.
Jason Shurka, host of the Pyramid Code. Great to have you here twice this all of this. And I saw it on X. I said, Italian, Scottish researchers claim they discovered a vast underground city under the pyramids. It's an unbelievable story using synthetic aperture radar. So, and why now? Like, how they just discovered this now? Really? Jason Shurka is the host of the Pyramid Code on Unified TV, who's been watching this very closely and, of course, has a lot of thoughts about this. So we invited Jason here on the show to talk about this and have a conversation. Jason, welcome to the show. Good to see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
All right. So when you heard this news, over the past few days, when the Italian video was released and you have to go through the subtitles and sort of unpack all of this, and I saw it on X, I said, I'm sorry, hold on a second. There's a massive underground city underneath Giza that's 3 kilometers deep, hundreds and hundreds of meters wide. Like, what did you think when you heard this?
So what I'd like to do is actually break down a few facts for everybody, because everybody's hearing this news from a bunch of different sources. Some is true, some isn't. Nobody really knows what to think. But what I thought when I first saw it was, thank God, finally somebody is speaking about this, because what you're hearing now is nothing new. As a matter of fact, the study, or so-called the research that these Italian researchers did, their names are Corrado Malanga, I believe, and Filippo Biondi. They're both researchers in the radar and remote sensing research aspect of things. And they actually published a peer-reviewed study and their research in an article titled Synthetic Aperture Radar Doppler Tomography Reveals Details of Undiscovered High-Resolution Internal Structure of the Great Pyramid of Giza. But guess when that was actually put out? It wasn't a few days ago. That research was put out in 2022. So my question, number one, why are we speaking about it now if it came out in 2022?
Right. Well, that is a great question. Do you have an answer as to why we're just learning about this now? I mean, and I know you have documented a lot of this going back years. And in fact, there's recorded information going back to, I mean, wherever you come down on this, I don't know. But Billy Meyer and his contactee publications in 1953, and this is verifiable, by the way. This is copyrighted, verifiable information of Billy Meyer specifically talking about going underneath, being transported in a beam ship and going underneath the pyramids in a massive underground chamber. Now, you might laugh at it, but it was published in 1953. I mean, so why are we learning about this now, Jason?
So I'll cover both sides. I'll cover the factual side, and I'll cover the side that some people may call weird, but it's important to note because there are coincidences, and then there are things that just can't be coincidence. So factually, what happened over here is it's called SAR data, synthetic aperture radar data. Along with that came this proprietary software that was created by one of those researchers, the Italian researchers. And the way that it works is it transforms the radar signals that they're detecting into something called photonic information. Now, the simple way of explaining that is it tracks vibrations down to the millimeter to identify underground structures without excavation. So it's a very non-invasive way of being able to figure out what's deep below us. Now, this research was done on the second largest pyramid of the Giza Plateau. It's known as the Khafre Pyramid. What they found was 5 identical structures inside the pyramid itself, But what was even more interesting than that is underneath those 5 identical structures were these 8 massive, they look like cylinders. Nobody really knows what they are. They found that they were hollow inside, and they're surrounded by what looks like a coil. Some people are saying that the radar seems to show that there's stairs bringing you down. And on the bottom of those cylinders, which by the way are 648 meters each, that's massive, let alone to put something underground 4,000 years ago whenever that happened. On the bottom of those cylinders, you have 2 very large cubic structures that seem to be some sort of basement, like what you were just talking about that guy spoke about in 1953. Now, each cubic basement, I call them basements, nobody knows what they are, measure about 80 meters on each side. That's about almost a football field in terms of each side of that cube. These are massive structures underground. And the entire structure extends about, not exactly, but about 2 kilometers beneath the surface of all 3 pyramids of the Giza Plateau. Now, they're telling us that, and this is at least what the textbooks tell us, how I grew up in school. The pyramids were tombs for these pharaohs that they wanted to honor. And they built them using ramps and sledges and hammers. Now, this just blows that theory and that history out of the water, because you don't build what we just spoke about with ramps and sledges and hammers. There's something else going on. But my question that we have to ask, and then we can go into the weird part, factually,
as if that's not weird enough.
The proportions of the structure itself have certain mathematical constants built into them, like pi, 3.14, the golden ratio, and the most interesting one to me, modern science calls it a coincidence. I don't buy it. The speed of light. Now, how do we get the speed of light? The latitude line that the Great Pyramid is sitting on is 29.9792458 degrees. And if you just move that decimal by 2, you're going to get 299,792,458. And what that number is in meters per second is the speed of light. Now, call that a coincidence? I don't think it's a coincidence. They knew something, and we don't understand how they knew it. But somebody's just saying they placed it to this degree, 6, 7 decimal points after the 0 to the exact point of the speed of light in meters per second. They knew something that we don't understand today.
That's wild.
Now, there's some texts, and I think you shared them with our team earlier, where I think, and this was published in the Pyramid Code. So the pharaohs brought with them a different form of technology called electromagnetic pulsation. And this technology gave them the ability to build massive pyramids. Underneath these massive structures are very large basements that house the tools and technology used to make them. So, to my knowledge, no one has found these basements under the pyramids, according to the text that you provided. So this was published. This was published back years ago, that we were being told that they built these massive basements there. So we have the documentation of this.
So what you're reading from is a document called the Pyramid Code. It's not something that I wrote. It's something that I was given back in July or August of 2020. The person who wrote it likes kind of remaining behind the scenes. He doesn't like being in the spotlight. He gave it to me, and he said you could share it with the world. So that's what I did. And everybody called me crazy. They said, Jason, they're pyramids, they're tombs. Leave it alone. They built it with water and hammers and sledges, and that's about it. And it turns out that when this document that came out on September 9th of 2020, free for the world on my website, it says exactly that. It says that this technology gave them the ability to build massive pyramids. And it specifically says, as you said, and I quote from the document, I'm reading it right in front of me, underneath these massive structures are very large basements that house the tools and technology used to make them. Now, this is a 44-page document. There's a lot of information that goes into what some may call the non-factual side of things. But when you kind of connect the dots, a lot of this makes sense. There's all these theories of, did humans build them? Was it really slaves, or were they extraterrestrial? All I know is We can barely build something like that today with the technology that we have. So there had to be some form of intervention back then. And we don't even need to go into textbooks. Look at the writing on the wall, literally in the pyramid. Look at the hieroglyphics on the wall. They tell us the story. There are literal carvings on the wall showing us pictures from 2, 3, 4,000 years ago that they carved, basically telling us that they had other forms of technology that are in many cases foreign to us today. And all you have to do is ask yourself, how do you pick up a stone, not to mention many stones, that our modern day technology and cranes can't pick up today? And if we connect the dots and use some logic, when you use sound, and there are certain universities that have done this, using sound waves to move very, very heavy objects without touching them, it's all a matter of frequency. You use the right frequency, you can break a glass. You use
And
the
isn't
proper
there
frequency to move things.
Isn't there imagery of this in the Mayan pyramids as well, using these sound techniques, and almost it looks like magic wands of some of the imagery directing the building of these structures with what looks like a magic wand?
You know, it's very interesting that you brought that up, because that's another point of logic that we need to bring up. I like going into the theories and connecting some dots, but I need fact to base that off of. And from what we're told, thousands of years ago, we were not very advanced, as far as they tell us at least. And therefore, we couldn't have really communicated across continents, right? Christopher Columbus only discovered America, a few hundred years ago. But if that were true, please explain to me, and this is a question, not an answer, explain to me, how is it that there are pyramids all over the planet that have, in some cases, the same inscriptions and carvings into the stone of certain objects and stories, if we didn't have any interplanetary communication back then? And it begs the question, well, did we? And are they not telling us something? Because if what I'm saying right now is accepted by modern day science and archaeologists around the world, it changes all of our history. It would bring us to the point of saying maybe we were more advanced back then than we are today. And maybe had those advancements today, humanity would be a whole lot more empowered. But if you go to politics, look what we're fighting over. We're fighting over oil. We're fighting over gas. We're fighting over energy. What happens if what the Pyramid Code series and the document says is true? What happens if what Nikola Tesla was saying over 100 years ago was true and free energy is possible? Well, the people that are fighting over natural gas now have a common enemy. It wouldn't just be World War III. It would be World War IV, based on what they would be fighting over, because free energy would change the world for the better for humanity. It would destroy the powers that be today.
Right. Oh, it's unbelievable. I kind of come back to just thinking about Billy Meyer again, 1953, telling us what he saw there, and then people just dismiss this out of hand. Traveling there on these beam ships as a contactee case, you can again dismiss it if you want. He published it in 1953 and told us about these massive caverns. So where do things stand now with the research on this, Jason? Like, I know there's people that want, obviously, a second opinion, verifiable information. Now that we think that these things are there, these massive cylinders underneath the pyramids that go down, 3 kilometers, where do we stand with the research? Are we going to go and do some sort of excavation, second opinion? Where do things go from here?
I'll give you my opinion on this. I can't share a fact, but my opinion, by, again, connecting certain dots and understanding the implications of such a revelation of what is now coming out to the world, because people knew about this for quite some time, I do not believe they're going to let us go down there and excavate. And even if they do, the findings that they find, I personally believe, will be hidden or kept secret for a period of time, because what the pyramids were really intended for, if you look at them with their mathematical formulas, and what a lot of people even use them for today, is healing. There are a lot of different rooms that create certain frequencies when you're sitting in there, and people till this day go there and have incredible experiences when it comes to healing. That actually inspired everything that we're doing around the world with certain healing technologies. We have a technology right now around the world that's in the shape and direct proportion of the Great Pyramid, called the Light System, specifically created and inspired after the Great Pyramid of Egypt, after the Great Pyramid on the Giza Plateau. So personally, just my personal opinion, I do not believe that they're going to allow more and more information to come out. But I do believe at some point they will have no choice because it's just going to be so obvious. To get closer and closer to that truth, people need to start just considering maybe the history that we've been told is different than what we've been told. Maybe we're more powerful than what we've been told. And maybe there are a lot of secrets that when we start looking at them and start really saying maybe our authorities aren't telling us everything, we start finding those truths, meaning don't just look for the expert in power to tell you something, because in many cases, the expert in power is paid off by the people that control this world. And if we start going into ourselves and start looking around the world and connecting some dots, we can look at what the experts say and hear what they say. But we also have to use our own logic. And when you have a proper balance between the two, this world will become a much healthier and more conscious place.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Go, Phil. Follow me.